So, usually when you look at the top leagues in modern world football, you're looking at this highly sanitized, um, incredibly predictable corporate structure,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. It's totally sanitized.
Yeah, I mean, you've got these billionaire ownership groups,
Mm.
sophisticated global marketing campaigns, and algorithms running the scouting departments.
Right.
And the stadiums, they feel way more like, you know, luxury shopping malls than actual athletic venues.
They really do. It's all hyper commercialized.
Exactly. You look at these massive clubs and you realize that the relationship between the team on the pitch and the community outside the stadium walls, it's just become purely transactional for the most part.
Yeah, you just become a consumer.
Right. You buy the ticket, you consume the 90-minute product, maybe you buy the merchandise, and then you just go home.
It is the inevitable result of all that hyper commercialization. Like the club becomes a global brand first and a local civic institution second,
Yeah.
if it even acts like one at all.
Yeah.
The whole identity of a club is just dictated by television rights and global reach, not by the actual people who live, like, right in the shadow of the stadium.
But every once in a while, you dig into a set of sources and you stumble upon a story that just completely shatters that modern mold.
Oh, for sure.
A story where the line between a town's community and its football club isn't just blurred, it literally does not exist.
Yeah, it's totally intertwined.
You step into a world where a team's mere survival isn't dictated by quarterly revenue reports or some sugar daddy owner. It's dictated by surviving massive geopolitical tectonic shifts, institutional collapse, bureaucratic betrayals, and literally spending decades wandering in the wilderness.
Which is exactly what makes today's exploration so compelling for you listening. We're looking at the absolute definition of a community's beating heart, just manifesting on a football pitch.
So, welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight in today because our mission is to really unpack the century-long roller coaster of a community's heart and soul.
It's quite a ride.
It really is. So, we are heading to Lithuania, specifically to the town of Telšiai in the Žemaitijos region, to explore the incredible, baffling, and deeply inspiring story of FC Džiugas Telšiai.
Such a fascinating club.
Right. And we're going to trace this club from its incredibly humble multi-sport origins all the way back in 1923 through its tragic dissolution during the Soviet era, its miraculous grassroots rebirth, and all the way up to its current highly paradoxical 2026 season in the top tier of Lithuanian football, the TOPLYGA.
And, my core belief for this entire analysis, really the lens that brings all of this into focus for you, is that a football club's on-pitch tactical struggles in the modern day can rarely be separated from its historical journey.
Okay, yeah.
Like the way a team sets up in a low block, the way they manage risk, or how they react to adversity in the 89th minute of a match in 2026, it's often deeply rooted in what that club and that specific community has had to endure just to secure the right to step onto that pitch.
Wow, yeah.
You really cannot separate the tactics from the history.
Well, let's put that theory to the test right from the beginning then. The sources take us back to November 2, 1923, into Lyga, to the actual birth of the sports association Džiugas.
Right.
But right away, the documentation paints a picture that is fundamentally different from how we think about football clubs today. Because it wasn't just a football club.
Not at all. It was so much more.
Yeah, between 1923 and 1946, they obviously fielded a football team, but they also organized a basketball team, an ice hockey team, and eventually expanded to cover a pretty wide array of other sports in the city.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
They operated as this massive, all-encompassing athletic umbrella for the entire town.
And what's fascinating here is that to understand the mechanics of early 20th century European sports clubs, you have to completely discard the modern lens of hyper-specialization.
Right, where everyone just does one thing.
Exactly. Today, an organization focuses entirely on optimizing one specific sport. But in 1923, in a localized setting like Telšiai, these sports associations were literal community centers. They were the focal point of civic life and physical education.
Yeah.
The goal wasn't just to win a localized football league.
It was bigger than that.
Right. The goal was to foster year-round camaraderie, physical health, and local pride.
Which makes complete sense when you think about the seasonal realities of the Baltic region. I mean, you can't exactly play free-flowing football in Lithuania in the dead of January in the 1920s.
Definitely not. You'd be playing in snowdrifts.
Right.
So the club was really a reflection of the town's seasonal rhythms. In the depths of winter, The community gathered to play and watch ice hockey.
Yeah.
And then as the ice thawed and the weather warmed up, the exact same community, often the exact same athletes, just transitioned over to basketball and football. The organization functioned as an infrastructure for human connection as much as it was a competitive sporting entity.
And you can actually see that community investment scaling up incredibly quickly in the source material. By 1926, which is just 3 years after they were founded, Džiugas executes a merger with another local sports club called Laimuta.
And that merger is a really critical inflection point for their organizational structure.
It absolutely is, because the sources specifically note that following this merger, they reached 145 official club members.
Wow.
Under the leadership of their first board director, a guy named S. Lukosius. Now, if you think about the population and the demographics of a regional Lithuanian town in 1926, securing 145 official members is a massive mobilization of the local population.
Oh, it's huge.
That is 145 families actively investing their time, energy, and probably their limited resources into this organization.
It creates a critical mass. When you transition from like a loose collection of athletes to having 145 official dues-paying members under a formalized board director like Lukosius, you undergo a fundamental shift.
Yeah, you level up.
Exactly. You aren't just a group of friends kicking a ball on a field anymore. You have governance. You have organizational accountability. You have real community stakeholders.
Right.
You become an institution.
And once you become an institution, you obviously start looking for official competition. Which brings us to a detail in the historical record that is just, honestly, fundamentally brilliant.
Oh, I love this part.
On June 6, 1927, the Džiugas football team plays their first official documented game. But they don't play a rival town. They don't play a neighboring football club. They play the Lithuanian Bicyclist Union.
The Bicyclist Union. It just perfectly encapsulates the era.
It really does. The match ended in a 2-2 draw. And okay, let's unpack this because I really want to pause and think about the sheer mechanics of this matchup.
Let's do it.
Because trying to play a football match against a union of bicyclists is like challenging an Olympic track and field team to a game of basketball.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the cyclists likely didn't have the intricate ball handling skills or, the tactical understanding of a defensive offside trap, but their physical conditioning and baseline cardio would have been absolutely terrifying to play against.
Oh, yeah. Your assessment of the physical disparity is likely very accurate. In the 1920s, tactical football theory was still in its absolute infancy, especially at that regional level.
Right. No one was playing tiki-taka.
Exactly. The game was heavily reliant on pure physical endurance, stamina, and just basic man-to-man coverage.
So you have the Džiugas players trying to build up play, and these cyclists are just relentlessly sprinting from box to box for 90 minutes without their heart rate ever spiking above a resting pace.
Just absolute machines. But beyond the physical reality of how that match played out, what that 1927 game actually reveals is how raw and nascent the sporting landscape was across Eastern Europe at that time.
Right.
Organized leagues, as we know them, were sparse. You played whoever had the organizational capacity to field 11 healthy people and coordinate travel.
Yeah, whoever showed up.
You played other trade unions, academic guilds, or civic associations. It was really a test of your organization's mettle against other structured groups, regardless of their primary discipline. And the fact that Džiugas drew them 2-2 shows it was a fiercely competitive environment.
They clearly honed their footballing identity very quickly after that, though, because as the timeline moves into the 1930s, the sources document Džiugas entering a true golden age in their region.
Yeah, they really hit their stride.
Between 1935 and 1937, they secured 3 consecutive championships in the Samogitian region.
And that level of regional dominance establishes them as the undisputed athletic powerhouse of that specific geography.
They weren't just squeaking by either. The records explicitly highlight the teams they were dismantling during this 3-year run. They were consistently defeating organized squads from Plunzi, Skodas, Tarago, and Majiki.
And to fully grasp the weight of those victories, you have to understand the logistics of regional dominance in the 1930s. Travel was arduous. National leagues were fragmented, highly localized, and often incredibly difficult to sustain logistically over long distances.
That makes sense.
Therefore, becoming the champion of your specific region, conquering the neighboring towns that you actually traded with and interacted with daily, that was the absolute pinnacle of civic pride.
Yeah.
Defeating Punkam or Majiki wasn't just a sporting victory. It was a definitive statement of cultural and civic superiority. It was Telšiai planting a flag and asserting itself as the capital of the Žemaitija region.
And they actually parlayed that regional confidence into a much larger stage, too. In 1938, the sources note a massive milestone for the club. Džiugas played their first ever international game.
It's a huge deal.
They faced off against a Latvian side called Olimpija, and they secured a 2-1 victory.
Beating international opposition for a regional club of that size in 1938 is a monumental achievement.
Think about the timeline and the momentum here. It's 1938. The club has spent 15 years building this massive community base. They've just won 3 consecutive regional titles, and they are now defeating international teams from across the border in Latvia.
They must have felt invincible.
The pride flowing through Telšiai must have been astronomical. They had built an institution that was just thriving. But as anyone familiar with 20th century European history knows, 1938 was the absolute precipice.
Yeah.
The world, and specifically Eastern Europe, was about to be plunged into a darkness that would fundamentally alter the geopolitical map.
The storm clouds of the Second World War were gathering, and those subsequent geopolitical shifts would not just impact the region, but would strike directly at the heart of this football club.
Right. So the sources take us to the aftermath. It's 1946, World War II has ended, but Lithuania is not free. It's been absorbed as the Lithuanian SSR, a constituent republic of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And the fate of Džiugas is essentially sealed by bureaucratic decree. In 1946, the club is forcibly attached to the statewide sports union Žalgiris, and the team is abruptly relegated to participating in the lower Lithuanian SSR football divisions.
This is a classic textbook example of Soviet centralization, and the mechanics behind it are vital to understand.
Walk us through it.
Under the post-war Soviet restructuring, the philosophy toward sports, culture, and civic organization was heavily centralized and strictly controlled by the state apparatus.
Okay.
Independent, localized identities like a fiercely proud, autonomous regional club in Telšiai, they were viewed through a lens of deep suspicion. They were seen as potential hubs for regional nationalism, or, at best, administratively inefficient.
Right, because the state cannot allow a localized institution to wield that much cultural influence over its people.
Precisely. The solution implemented across the Eastern Bloc was to absorb these organic local clubs into massive state-run athletic societies. You had societies tied to the military, to the police, to the railway workers. In Lithuania, the Žalgiris Union became the overarching state-sponsored umbrella for sports.
So they just got swallowed up.
Exactly. By attaching Džiugas to this massive union and simultaneously dropping them into the lower divisions, the state fundamentally stripped the club of its autonomy.
They took a community-built institution and just turned it into a localized cog within a monolithic state machine, which, makes you wonder about the psychological impact on the town itself.
It had to be immense.
Like, what happens to the cultural fabric of a place like Telšiai when the club that your family helped build in 1923, the club that fought the bicyclist union, the club that conquered Žemaitija, is just administratively absorbed and stripped of everything that made it unique?
It creates a profound cultural void. Imagine a beloved local institution in your own community, like, for you listening, a place built by locals, funded by locals, and holding decades of shared memories.
What, like your favorite local diner or theater?
Exactly. Now imagine a massive, faceless conglomerate forces a takeover, alters the operational structure, standardizes everything to fit a national template, and completely strips away the quirky, localized characteristics that gave it a soul.
Oh, heartbreaking.
The physical building might still be there, the team might still play on the pitch, but the essence is gone. That loss of civic identity is devastating.
And they existed in that bureaucratic shadow for a very long time. The source material is noticeably barren from the 1950s all the way through the 1980s, which is a really stark indicator of just how deep in the wilderness the club was under Soviet administration.
Just kind of lost to history for a bit.
But then the tectonic plates of history shift once again. The Soviet Union collapses. Lithuania bravely reclaims its independence. And almost immediately, we see a flicker of that old 1930s magic return to the pitch.
It's amazing how fast it came back.
It really is. During the 1992-1993 season, the sources tell us Džiugas rises up and becomes the champions of the third league.
It is a brief but incredibly telling post-Soviet resurgence. The moment the heavy blanket of state control is lifted, the community instantly rallies to put a championship-caliber team back on the field.
It's as if the town collectively took its first deep breath of free air in decades and just immediately poured that energy into their historic football club.
Yeah.
But that euphoria was agonizingly short-lived because the very next year, in 1994, the sources deliver probably the most devastating line in this entire timeline.
Yeah, this part is tough.
The club was entirely dissolved, it ceased to exist, and a brand new TOPLYGA team called Mastis was formed in its place.
The absolute death of a historic institution.
I really struggled to wrap my head around this when I was reviewing the sources. They survived the outbreak of World War II, they endure nearly 50 years of Soviet absorption, they finally breathe free air, they win a championship in an independent Lithuania, and then they just collapse.
It seems backwards.
Totally backward. They dissolve entirely. Why does a club die right after winning a title and securing national independence?
Because sporting success cannot outrun economic reality.
Ah.
You have to look at the macroeconomic shock therapy that was occurring across post-Soviet states in the early 1990s. For decades, the infrastructure of these clubs, the travel, the kits, the stadium maintenance, it was funded, however poorly, by the state apparatus.
Right, the government paid for it.
When the Soviet Union collapsed and Lithuania transitioned rapidly to a free market economy, that state funding vanished overnight.
So they were champions on the pitch, but completely bankrupt in the back office.
Exactly. Historic institutions that relied on old economic structures simply couldn't survive the brutal transition to capitalism, regardless of their goal difference.
Wow.
The dissolution of Džiugas and the subsequent formation of Mastis was almost certainly a desperate, pragmatic attempt by the local organizers to create a new, financially viable, modernized legal entity that could attract private sponsorship in a new economy.
It makes sense, sadly.
But it came at the ultimate cost. It cost them the Džiugas name and the direct lineage back to 1923.
But the thing about local football is that you can dissolve a legal entity and you can change the name on the front of the jersey, but you cannot legislate away a community's collective memory. The people of TOPLYGA knew who they were.
The corporate entity died, but the cultural memory went dormant.
And it stayed dormant for a full 2 decades. From 1994 until 2014, the name Džiugas essentially vanished from the senior competitive football map.
A long time to wait.
But behind the scenes, away from the national spotlight, that memory was clearly festering and organizing. Because in 2014, the miraculous happens. The sources document that the club is officially reestablished by the football community of TOPLYGA.
And I really want to emphasize the phrasing there. Reestablished by the football community.
Yeah.
This is not a wealthy foreign investor coming in to buy a lower league franchise as a vanity project. This is a pure grassroots resurrection.
So cool.
This is local business owners pooling money, former players coming out of retirement, and fans organizing to physically put the infrastructure back together.
And they didn't just casually return to the pitch either. They came back with absolute ferocity. In their very first season back in 2014, playing down in the Lyga, which operates as the 3rd tier of Lithuanian football, they instantly secure 2nd place and gain direct promotion up to the Lyga, the 2nd tier.
The sheer momentum of a reborn community is an incredibly powerful sporting force.
It truly is. But as any football tactician knows, raw momentum and emotion only carry you so far before you slam into the cold reality of professionalized competition.
Right, the honeymoon phase ends.
Exactly. The sources map out a grueling attritional climb once they hit that 2nd tier. In 2015, they finished 10th. They're barely treading water, just fighting to survive in a tougher league.
Just surviving.
But by 2017 and 2018, they've managed to claw their way up to 5th place in consecutive seasons. They are stabilizing their foundation. But the 2019 season is where this narrative goes completely cinematic.
2019 is the definitive turning point of the modern era for Džiugas.
Before a ball is even kicked in the 2019 season, there is a massive internal shift. The sources show that head coach Vyunas Vasiliauskas departs. And who does the club bring in to replace him? Mario Suda.
Oh, yes.
A retired club player, a man who intimately understands the DNA of the organization. And Iluta steps into the managerial role and does the unthinkable. In 2019, under his tactical leadership, Džiugas doesn't just compete. They win the IDA outright.
Incredible.
They finish in 1st place. They are the champions of the 2nd tier.
And by the fundamental laws of sporting meritocracy, winning the 2nd tier dictates that you are promoted to the 1st tier. You have earned your rightful place in the top flight, the Isla. You have conquered the pyramid.
Right, you'd think so. But here comes the twist, the absolutely agonizing twist in the documentation.
This part is so brutal.
The sources state that despite winning the league on the pitch, Džiugas failed to meet the licensing criteria for the Lyga, and as a result, they were officially denied promotion. They were forced to remain down in the Lyga for the 2020 season.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a brutal but vital lesson in the mechanics of modern European football administration. We touched on how hyper-commercialized the top leagues have become, and that commercialization requires strict standardization.
Right.
Winning on the pitch simply isn't enough anymore. UEFA and national federations have implemented incredibly stringent licensing criteria to protect the product of the top flight.
But doesn't that completely undermine the romance of the sport? I mean, if a team wins the league, they should go up. Why does the federation care about a license if the team has proven they're the best footballing side?
The federation cares because they are terrified of institutional collapse.
Okay, how so?
The licensing criteria dictate that a club must prove robust financial stability. They must possess a specific standard of stadium infrastructure with adequate seating and broadcasting facilities. They often need fully operational youth academies and certified medical setups.
That's a lot of red tape.
It is. But the federation does this to prevent a small club from getting promoted, completely overextending their finances to compete, and then going bankrupt halfway through the season, which compromises the integrity of the entire league schedule.
Oh, I see.
If the front office cannot meet those bureaucratic infrastructural standards, the players' incredible achievements on the pitch are administratively nullified.
Okay. The logic makes sense from a corporate perspective, but it is deeply painful from a human perspective.
Completely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I was trying to contextualize this. And the best way I can describe this 2019 season is imagining that you spend years studying relentlessly, you ace your final exams, you get an acceptance letter to your absolute dream university, and when you show up on the first day of classes, administration turns you away at the door because your laptop doesn't have the correct operating system.
That is exactly what it feels like.
It is bureaucratic friction overriding human achievement.
It is a devastating analogy, and the emotional whiplash inside that club must have been catastrophic.
Let's deeply consider the psychology of that locker room for a second. Imagine the immense leadership burden placed on Marius Saluta.
Oh, man.
He's a former player. He bleeds for this community. He transitions to head coach. He does the impossible by winning the league. And then, before the 2020 season begins, he has to walk into a locker room of exhausted players and say, "Boys, we were the best. We won. But the front office failed the paperwork, so we have to go out and do it all over again against the exact same teams in the exact same league."
Managing the psychology of a locker room after a betrayal by bureaucracy is arguably a more difficult managerial feat than winning the league in the first place.
I can't even imagine.
When players feel cheated by the system, intrinsic motivation completely plummets. The natural human instinct is nihilism. Why bother tackling hard? Why bother running the extra mile if a guy with a clipboard in an office can just erase your victory?
But they didn't succumb to that nihilism. They actually bothered. That is the true resilience of this community. In 2020, they faced that massive psychological adversity head-on. Now, they didn't win the league again. The emotional toll and the target on their back likely prevented a repeat title, and they finished fourth.
Which is still impressive under the circumstances.
Very.
Yeah.
And due to the broader dynamics of the league structure that year and the fact that the front office finally got their infrastructural paperwork in order, that fourth-place finish was enough.
Thank goodness.
In 2020, they officially secured promotion to the Promised Land. They became an Lyga team.
It is a story of ultimate redemption. They validated their 2019 title by refusing to fade away in 2020.
But as any mountaineer will tell you, reaching the summit is only half the journey. Surviving at that altitude, where the air is incredibly thin and the elements are hostile, is an entirely different challenge.
That's where the real test begins.
Right. Which brings us to the next massive phase of their history.
Yeah.
Life in the top flight and the great escape between 2021 and 2025.
The transition from being a dominant force in the second tier to being an underdog fighting for scraps in the top tier requires a complete recalibration of a club's identity.
Their debut season in 2021 was actually surprisingly stable. The sources show they finished 8th in the Lyga, which is highly respectable for a newly promoted side. They proved they belonged on the same pitch as the big clubs.
Yeah, 8th is solid.
But 2022. The documentation paints 2022 as an absolute existential crisis for Džiugas.
In footballing parlance, second season syndrome is a heavily documented phenomenon. The pure, unadulterated adrenaline of promotion carries a team through their first year.
Just running on vibes, basically.
Exactly. But by the second year, the adrenaline has completely worn off. Opposing managers have had a full season to analyze and exploit your tactical weaknesses, and the grim reality of a talent deficit sets in.
And that reality hit them incredibly hard. Mid-season in 2022, the club is forced to make a heart-wrenching decision. Mari Saluda, the local hero, the former player, the man who guided them through the licensing nightmare and finally got them promoted, is dismissed.
A really tough call for the board to make.
They make a managerial change, bringing in Juan Manuel Lopez Pretzes to try and salvage the campaign. But despite the change in leadership, they finished the 2022 season in 9th place.
Which places them in the most agonizing position possible.
Right.
Finishing 9th in a league structured like the Liga means you aren't automatically safe, but you aren't automatically relegated either. You are condemned to the purgatory of a relegation playoff.
Exactly. They had to face a terrifying two-legged tie against a highly motivated team from the lower division, FK Neptunas. A two-game shootout to decide if their entire TOPLYGA dream, everything they had suffered for since 2014, was going to be extinguished after just 2 years.
Let's analyze the mechanics of this specific playoff, because it is a fascinating case study in managing high-stakes pressure. The first match was away from home in Klaipėda. The result, Džiugas wins 4-0.
4-0, away from home in a relegation dogfight.
It is practically unheard of. Winning 4-0 away from home in the most high-pressure, existentially threatening game of the club's modern history demonstrates an immense level of mental fortitude.
Seriously.
That wasn't just a tactical victory. That was a comprehensive psychological dismantling of Neptunas. It indicates that João Prats, regardless of his specific tactical formations, managed to instill a ruthless, cold-blooded survival instinct into that squad right when the pressure was at its absolute peak.
They then travel back home to TOPLYGA for the second leg and grind out a 1-0 win, taking the aggregate score to 5-0 and decisively saving their Liga status.
A clean sweep.
And I want to paint a picture of that second leg based on the infrastructural details in the sources. The club plays in the TOPLYGA Central Stadium, which has a listed capacity of exactly 2,400 people.
It is a highly intimate, enclosed, and intensely localized environment.
Imagine standing in that 2,400-seat stadium for that second leg. You are shoulder to shoulder with people you literally see at the grocery store.
Yeah, everybody knows everybody.
Right. You know that your club's entire existence in the top tier is hanging in the balance. You carry the memory of the 20 years when the club didn't even exist. You carry the memory of the 2019 licensing betrayal. All of that generational history, dating back to playing the Bicyclist Union in 1927, is sitting directly on the shoulders of the 11 players on that pitch.
The tension must have been suffocating.
When the referee blew the final whistle on that 1-0 win, cementing their survival, the collective release of tension in that 2,400-seat stadium must have been euphoric.
Surviving that specific playoff was the absolute bedrock for everything the club has achieved since. If they lose that tie, the financial and emotional blow could have sent the club spiraling right back down the pyramid. But by executing that survival, they bought themselves the most valuable commodity in football, time to build.
And build they did. The sources track a period of impressive, steady stabilization over the next few years. They finished 9th again in 2023, but then they figure something out. They jumped to 6th in 2024 and 7th in 2025.
That's real progress.
They are no longer just desperately fighting for survival. They are establishing themselves as permanent fixtures in the Liga.
And you can also see their infrastructural and commercial growth reflecting that on-pitch stability.
Yes. The sources highlight a seemingly small but highly significant business detail. Since their rebirth in 2014, their kits had been manufactured by Joma. But starting in the 2026 season, they secured an upgrade to Puma.
Oh, wow.
Now, changing a logo on a shirt might sound trivial to some, but in the business of football, securing a Tier 1 global brand like Puma is a massive signal of intent.
Absolutely.
It communicates to the league, to potential sponsors, and to prospective players. We are no longer a plucky underdog story. We are a permanent, professional fixture in the top flight.
It is corporate validation of their sporting project. A brand like Puma doesn't invest in a club unless they see sustained stability and marketability.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the incredibly unique, highly complex squad they have constructed for the current 2026 season. The roster provided in the sources is just a logistical marvel.
It is an ambitious, borderline audacious piece of squad assembly for a town of TOPLYGA's size.
The key architect overseeing this operation is the chairman, Martynas Armalis. But before we look at the players Armalis has brought in, we have to address a fascinating managerial discrepancy hidden within the sources.
Yeah, this part caught my eye too.
The primary Wikipedia source explicitly lists Andrius Lipskis as the current head coach. However, the highly detailed recent form report we have heavily references Joan Pratz's team and analyzes his specific tactical setup.
And this raises an important question regarding how we consume football data and really the internal mechanics of a club in transition. Like, are they currently in the middle of a managerial change?
Right.
With Lipski's just recently appointed, and the form report is merely reflecting the tail end of Pratz's tenure? Or is there a more complex internal dynamic at play here? Is Pratz operating behind the scenes in a sporting director capacity, heavily influencing the tactical blueprint, while Lipskis holds the official title of head coach just to satisfy league licensing requirements?
Or, to push back on that a bit, is it just the chaotic, fragmented reality of fast-moving football databases? Maybe a Wikipedia editor just hasn't updated the page to reflect a recent sacking, and we are just totally overthinking it.
The lag in public databases is highly probable. But honestly, regardless of who is physically standing in the technical area shouting instructions, the actual squad they are managing is deeply fascinating.
It really is. When you break down the roster, you see a foundational core of domestic Lithuanian talent. You have players like Marius Paukoti in goal, Džiugas Telšiai anchoring the defense, and Vilius Piliukaitis operating in the midfield.
The local spine of the team.
Exactly. These are local guys who intrinsically understand the rhythm, the travel, and the physicality of the Lyga. But then you look at the international contingent, and it is massive.
The geographic footprint of this scouting network is staggering for a club operating out of a 2,400-seat stadium.
They have assembled an absolute United Nations in Samojisha. Just from South America, they have a Brazilian, Pedro Bahia, and an Argentine, Iker Scoto. From Africa, they have brought in Berkuri Sane from Senegal, Ibrahim Sisse from the Ivory Coast, and Brendan Asamuga from Nigeria.
It's just wild.
And it doesn't stop there. From across Europe, they have Valentino Vermeulen from the Netherlands, Denis Bunchukov from Ukraine, Joshua Akapolgopo from Ireland, Jakub Buwalczyk from Poland, and Ronald Sobowal from England.
Rather than just looking at the sheer number of nationalities, we really need to analyze the mechanism of how this happens. How does a club in Telšiai identify and recruit a defender from Senegal or a striker from Argentina?
Yeah, how does that even work?
It speaks to the incredible globalization of football scouting. Small clubs no longer rely purely on local trials. They leverage vast digital platforms like Wisecout. They tap into complex networks of international player agencies, and they take calculated gambles on free agents who are desperate for a foothold in European football.
I'm fascinated by the sheer logistics of cultural integration here. How does Chairman Martinez Ormalis make this work on a human level?
The massive challenge.
Just envision the locker room dynamics. It must be an absolute linguistic collision. You have Spanish, French, Portuguese, English, Ukrainian, Polish, and Lithuanian all bouncing off the walls of the training ground.
The tactical instruction alone requires a masterclass in nonverbal communication. But even beyond the pitch, Ormalis has to manage their survival in a new environment.
Right.
You aren't just scouting a young Brazilian's dribbling ability, you are heavily relying on his psychological adaptability. Can a winger from South America or West Africa adapt to the biting cold of a Lithuanian winter? Can an English forward adapt to the specific tactical rigidities of the TOPLYGA?
And on a basic human level, where do they all live in Telšiai? Do they have a dedicated translator on staff, or does football just become the universal language out of pure necessity?
They'd almost have to rely on football as the common language.
Building a roster like this requires a massive unseen support infrastructure to prevent the players from becoming completely isolated. And amidst all this international recruitment, the sources note a highly pragmatic domestic move, too.
Oh, the loan deal.
Yeah. They have secured a forward named Tomas Stelmokas on loan. But he's not on loan from a team in the division below. He is on loan from Kauno Žalgiris, who are one of Džiugas's direct top-tier league rivals.
Loaning a player from a direct competitor is always a complex dynamic, but it shows a ruthless pragmatism from both organizations. Kauno Žalgiris gets to develop their player with high-level minutes, and Džiugas secures a Liga-proven talent without paying a massive transfer fee.
Keep Stelmokas in mind because his specific situation anchors our final thought perfectly later on. But with this heavily international, linguistically diverse, complex squad, the most pressing question is, how is this experiment actually translating onto the pitch in 2026?
Yeah, what are the results?
Which brings us to a deep dive into their recent form and what the sources reveal to be a massive tactical paradox.
It is an incredibly polarizing set of results.
The sources provided a highly detailed report on their last 5 competitive matches, and the statistical profile is bizarre. Over these last 5 games, they have secured 3 draws and suffered 2 defeats. They have not registered a single victory. Okay.
But here is the crux of the paradox. Across those 5 matches, a total of only 2 goals have been scored by Džiugas.
They have engineered an absolute ironclad defense, but it is paired with a completely blunt, toothless attack. Let's synthesize this data and break down the specific tactical identity they are deploying.
Let's do it. The run started with a 1-1 away draw against Hagelman. The report characterizes this as a highly resilient point on the road.
A good result away from home.
Following that, they suffered a narrow 2-1 home loss to the league leaders, Sūduva. The notes indicate they were highly competitive, but ultimately fell short against superior opposition.
Understandable against the league leaders.
Then, stepping outside of league play, they faced a 2-1 away loss in the Lithuanian Cup to TOPLYGA, where they conceded the decisive goal late in the second half.
So, analyzing those first 3 fixtures, you see a team that is competitive. They're scoring sporadically, but they're conceding just enough defensive errors to drop points or get knocked out of a cup.
But following that cup exit, a distinct tactical shift occurs. The manager completely recalibrates the system.
The shift is drastic. Their 4th game is a 0-0 home draw against Žalgiris Vilnius. The match report highly praises their disciplined defensive setup, noting they completely neutralized a team that traditionally boasts one of the most potent attacks in the country.
That's a huge statement defensively.
And then their most recent match, Game 5, is another 0-0 home draw, this time against Kauno Žalgiris. It's their 2nd consecutive clean sheet. The report highlights a deeply compact backline, but explicitly calls out a total lack of creativity in the final third.
If we evaluate this through the lens of modern tactical theory, whoever is setting up this team, whether it's Prot's lingering blueprint or Lipski's new vision, has flawlessly executed the low block.
Okay, unpack the low block for us.
Securing consecutive 0-0 draws against heavyweights like Žalgiris Vilnius and Kauno Žalgiris demands immense defensive discipline. You need an incredibly compact shape, you need midfielders willing to track back relentlessly, and you need flawless communication across a backline, which, again, is astonishing, given the vast language barriers we discussed among this international squad.
True. How are they even communicating offside trap?
Exactly. But they're doing it. They have embraced a willingness to suffer without the ball for 90 minutes.
They are brilliantly organized at the back, but they are completely paralyzed in transition. When they finally win the ball back deep in their own half, they have no mechanism to launch a counterattack.
Right, there's no outlet.
The report explicitly states they are unable to convert possession into meaningful opportunities. They lack the offensive chemistry required to turn a solid defensive foundation into 3 points.
This is where the tactical gamble lies. They are playing a high-stakes game of risk management on the pitch. They are terrified of committing numbers forward to support the attack because they know that opening up their shape will compromise that ironclad defensive structure.
So what does this all mean? If you are relying entirely on 0-0 draws to maintain your position near the top half of the Liga standings, aren't you essentially walking a tightrope without a safety net?
You really are.
One singular defensive slip-up, one miscommunication between your center backs, one unlucky deflection, and you lose the game 1-0 because you have absolutely zero offensive capacity to score an equalizer.
That is the exact vulnerability of the low block. It demands absolute perfection for 90 minutes. If you concede in the 80th minute, you don't have the tactical mechanisms in place to suddenly flip a switch and become an attacking threat.
It feels like a massive psychological hurdle as much as a tactical one. The sources note they have extended their unbeaten league run to 2 matches with those 0-0 draws, and they are sitting relatively comfortably in the standings for the moment.
For now, yeah.
But how long can this heavily international squad survive in the top flight without finding a way to generate offensive chemistry? If the Argentine striker, the Brazilian winger, and the English forward cannot figure out how to interpret the same attacking spaces in the penalty box, the sheer weight of probability says they are going to start sliding down the TOPLYGA table.
Their defensive foundation will prevent them from getting blown out, but they will remain stagnant until they solve this offensive paradox. For you listening, think about how you manage risk in your own life or career. Do you play it incredibly safe to avoid losing, like Džiugas's defense? Or do you take risks to win, which they are currently failing to do in attack?
That's a great point.
On paper, they have recruited the international attacking talent. Now, the coaching staff needs to find the tactical key to unlock that chemistry without destroying the defensive solidity they've built.
And unlocking that potential is the exact challenge that will define the next chapter for this club. As we start to synthesize everything we've covered today, let's just take a moment to absorb the sheer scale of the historical journey we've just mapped out.
When you view the trajectory from end to end, it is a testament to community endurance.
It truly is. We started all the way back in 1923 with a multi-sport community association in TOPLYGA trying to figure out how to play football against a union of bicyclists.
Still my favorite part.
We watched them conquer their region in the 1930s, only to have their identity ruthlessly swallowed by the Soviet sports apparatus in 1946. We analyzed the heartbreaking reality of their complete dissolution in 1994 amidst the economic shock of the post-Soviet transition, replaced by a club named Mastis.
Only to witness a miraculous community-funded grassroots rebirth 20 years later in 2014.
Exactly. A rebirth that saw them claw their way back up the divisions, survive the devastating bureaucratic betrayal of being denied promotion despite winning the league in 2019, and finally cementing their place in the top tier of Lithuanian football.
What a ride.
And now, today, they are managing a globally diverse squad, sourced from 10 different nations, grinding out highly sophisticated tactical 0-0 draws in a 2,400-seat stadium in Samogitian.
Which brings me to a final, deeply fascinating thought I want to leave with anyone listening right now, building precisely on the details of that current roster and their recent defensive form.
Go ahead.
In their most recent match, that grueling, hard-fought 0-0 draw against Kano Ilgiris, there's beautifully complicated human element, completely hidden inside the sterile statistics of a scoreless draw. Think back to the roster dynamics we discussed. Džiugas fields a Lithuanian forward named Tomas Stelmokas. The sources explicitly tell us he is on loan from Kano Ilgiris.
Oh, wow. I see exactly where this is going.
In that 0-0 draw, Stelmokas was on the pitch, or available on the bench, tasked with playing directly against his parent club.
Crazy.
He was tactically instructed to score goals and inflict damage upon the very organization that ultimately holds his contract. Consider the intense psychological paradox for a player in that exact scenario.
It's got to be so conflicting.
If he executes his job perfectly, if he scores the winning goal and breaks that 0-0 deadlock, he secures a massive 3 points for his temporary community in TOPLYGA. But in doing so, he directly damages the league's standing and potentially the financial future of his actual employers, the club he is legally obligated to return to at the end of the loan spell.
It is a complete paradox of loyalty. He's a professional athlete who desperately wants to score and prove his worth, but he's also a human being who fully understands the macroeconomic consequences of doing so against his parent club.
Exactly. It's the kind of complex, highly personal, invisible drama that you can only uncover when you look past the basic scoreline. It's a conflict of interest, loyalty, and professionalism hidden right there inside a seemingly boring 0-0 draw in the TOPLYGA.
What a phenomenal way to frame it. It is the perfect reminder that every single data point, every tactical shift, and every historical milestone we analyze has actual human beings attached to it, navigating incredibly complex situations. Thank you for coming with us on this deep dive into the fascinating, chaotic, and beautiful world of FC Džiugas Telšiai. We hope this exploration has proven that sometimes the greatest, most deeply compelling stories in global sports aren't found under the sanitized bright lights of a Champions League final, but in the resilient, beating heart of a 2,400-seat stadium in Samogitian. Keep analyzing, keep looking for the history behind the tactics, and we'll catch you on the next one.